Hello, welcome to Movie Summaries. Today we are summarizing a 2021 horror, mystery, and drama movie called Things Heard and Seen. Giving you all a fair warning, there are spoilers in this summary. Enjoy, and be sure to like this video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more movie summary videos weekly. The movie starts with a man driving into his home garage, and it's winter of 1980. He parks, and then suddenly, blood starts dripping into his car windshield. The man gets out of his car, runs to his home, finds his daughter standing on a couch, grabs her, and they run out of the house into the distance. The film then cuts to a current time at a birthday party. Catherine Clare lives in Manhattan with her husband George Clare and daughter Franny. Catherine suffers from bulimia. She is a successful art restorer, while George is unemployed and borrows money from his father. Catherine and George were both fine art majors and met in undergraduate school. However, after submitting his PhD dissertation, George lands an art history teaching job at Saginaw College in upstate New York. Catherine hesitantly quits her lucrative job in the city and agrees to move to upstate New York for him. There, they move into a large 19th century farmhouse, which has vintage furniture and a beautiful old piano. On the first night of the family's new home, strange things occur. Catherine smells car exhaust fumes from her room, while Franny gets spooked by chairs moving in her room and lights flickering. The next day, George is welcomed to the college by Floyd De Beers, the head of the art history department. Floyd is interested in spirits and afterlives. He gives George a book called Heaven and Hell by a famed Swedish writer named Emanuel Swedenborg as a welcome gift. Is it just me? Or, that's a strange gift to give someone in the first meeting. Meanwhile, back at home, Catherine is getting ready in the bathroom, and all of a sudden, her toothbrush turns on, falls to the side and rolls off the sink. Really creepy. The doorbell rings and Catherine runs downstairs. Two brothers, Eddie and Cole Lux, drop by the Clares to introduce themselves, welcome them to the committee, and offer a hand for any housework. Catherine ends up hiring the two brothers to help around the house. Cole babysits Catherine's daughter, while Eddie works as the handyman. One night, Catherine comes across an old Bible containing a family tree of the previous owners in the house. It reveals the house was previously inhabited by the Smiths family. Some of the names in the family tree are scratched out and marked damned. She then senses a spirit and sees strange lights leading her to an antique ring, which she begins wearing. Catherine then decides to dig deep about the family and visits the local historical society. She learns that a man named Jacob Smith and his wife, Ella, used to live in the property. Over time, George becomes very popular in his college. Not only among students, he becomes quite known and respected among the college professors. George befriends his colleague Justine Sokolov, who is the weaving instructor at the college. She is amazed by George's seascapes. Catherine continues to smell exhaust fumes in her room at night. George speculates that it is coming from the garage that's below their bedroom. George assures her that he will install fans in the garage next morning. Tired of the smell, Catherine decides to fix it right away and heads to the garage. That doesn't sound like a good idea. As she fixes the fan, the piano starts to play in the other room, freaking out Catherine. When she inspects, the piano stops playing, and Catherine hears Franny screaming at the top of her lungs. I warned her. Catherine rushes upstairs. A frightened Franny tells her mom that she saw the spirit of a woman in her room and insists on sleeping with her parents. The next day, Catherine comes across the book Floyd had gifted George. Intrigued, she starts reading it. Meanwhile, George befriends Willis after meeting her at a college library. Willis is Eddie's cousin. She is initially hesitant to get close to George, but the two eventually start hooking up behind Catherine's back. After one of his hookup sessions, George brings Catherine a wild flower he came across on the way back home. The audacity of this man. Catherine, unaware of George's infidelity, initially appreciates the gesture, but after wearing Ella's ring, she throws the flower in the bin. Seemingly, under the ring's influence, Catherine learns that Eddie is good at playing musical instruments and wanted to study music in college. Eddie's mother was supportive of his choice, but his father disapproved and once beat him after he found Eddie's college application. Catherine empathizes with Eddie and offers to help him reapply to college if he wishes to. Eddie and Catherine's growing closeness starts to annoy George, but he stops short of expressing it. Isn't this the same man who has a side chick? The audacity. One night, George and Catherine go over to Justine's home for dinner. Justine and Catherine hit it off instantly due to their common interests. Justine invites Catherine to join Justine's women's art group. Longing for company, Catherine excitedly accepts the offer. Meanwhile, George bonds with Justine's husband Bram over their mutual love for smoking weed. On the way home, Catherine gushes over Justine, but George mocks Catherine for liking Justine and makes fun of Justine's weight. George then drives erratically under the marijuana's influence, worrying Catherine. An argument follows. Catherine expresses frustration over leaving her dream job for George. She feels George isn't appreciative of the sacrifices she made for him, and is instead taking digs at her efforts to settle down in her new home, and making fun of people she is befriending. George tries to calm her down, and take her back into the car, but he ends up pushing her down when she resists. Really? This man? Husband of the year? Not. George immediately regrets and apologizes to her. He again apologizes to Catherine after returning home, and expressing regret over not tending to her needs. But the husband and wife continue to drift apart. Catherine increasingly spends more time with Justine, while George gets busy with work. He often goes to sail with Floyd. During one of their sailing excursions, George reveals that he used to go sailing on his cousin Henry's boat named the Lost Horizon. Henry was a sophisticated artist. He drowned at the age of 19 while sailing. George later invites Floyd home. Floyd learns that Catherine read the whole book he gave to George after getting intrigued by the artwork on the cover. He explains the artwork in the book to her. It is a mystical painting of death, where a man is staring at a holy cross in the sky. The artwork depicts the soul transitioning into the afterlife. The book's author, Swedenborg, believed death is parallel to birth and divine. Catherine then gives Floyd a tour of her house. Floyd senses the presence of a female soul in the home. He reveals that the female spirit means no harm, and has a reason for lingering around the house. Catherine confirms Franny in her seeing a female spirit around the house. Floyd speculates that perhaps the spirit is there to look after Catherine and her daughter. Catherine feels relieved to have finally found someone who believes in her. She reveals that she initially was scared by the spirit, but eventually started feeling a sense of comfort with her presence. She wishes to learn more about the spirit. Floyd promises to research more about the Smith family and offers to hold a seance in the house. The next day, George and Catherine throw a party and invite neighbors and George's colleagues. During the party, Catherine learns through her neighbor Marie that the previous owners of the home died in a murder-suicide. The previous owners were the parents of Eddie and Cole. Eddie's father, Calvin Bailey, struggled financially and was very cruel to his wife Ella. One night, he sedated his family and shot all the cows they owned. After killing the cows, he went to the garage below his and Ella's bedroom. He started the ignition of his 2 trucks and closed all the windows. He then went upstairs and laid down in bed next to Ella. Ella and Calvin died from the fumes, while Eddie and Cole survived and became orphans. Why did George think Catherine would not hear about this eventually? Meanwhile, while smoking weed with Justine, George takes sarcastic digs at her for putting ideas in Catherine's head. Justine brushes it aside as a joke and expresses her concerns over George's growing closeness with the students. George asks her if that was a dig or advice, and Justine responds that it was just honest truth. George replies that people don't want the truth, and they don't want to be set free. Yeah, sometimes it is hard to tell what these art majors are saying. George then holds Justine's hand and dares her to free herself. Justine starts to get uncomfortable and asks him to let her hand go. George tells her that she likes it and grabs her hands more tightly while laughing. George eventually frees her hands, and Justine leaves in anger. After the party, Catherine confronts George about the house's violent history. As they argue, a radio begins playing, only stopping when George smashes it. Catherine asks George to take Franny to his parents' house and does her own research on Ella Bailey's murder case. She then invites Floyd to hold a seance. Floyd is surprised to learn that Ella is the female spirit they sensed in the house, as he had assumed that the spirit was Jacob Smith's wife. He then reveals that Smith's wife was an early devotee of Swedenborg. Jacob and his wife weren't in a happy marriage, and Jacob disapproved of his wife's philosophical explorations. She mysteriously died in their home at the age of 26. Catherine is alarmed by the number of deaths that have happened in her house, but the seance group assures her that inhabited houses should be considered a blessing. They are portals between the 2 realms, with guides to shepherd one when their time comes. Some call them guardian angels. The group speculates that perhaps Jacob's wife opened the portal's door after she was killed by her husband. Catherine questions if these spirits can be evil. She's told that the evil spirits only communes with an evildoer. Evil only thrives in the house where it is welcome, and goodness always triumphs. If not in this world, then in the next. Catherine then places Ella's ring on the table, and Floyd summons the spirit. The candles suddenly blow out, and the table starts shaking, freaking Catherine out. Ella's spirit lets her presence known. However, soon, the voice of another spirit is heard, who intimidates Ella. The entire group freaks out. Floyd continues that there is another spirit in the house. He tells Catherine that until the spirit reveals its nature, she should be careful of the people around her that might have attracted and housed the unfamiliar spirit. The next day, Catherine goes to the library to return the book she had borrowed. She also returns an overdue book that she found in George's car. She offers to pay the late fees, but the staff reveals that the book is issued in the name of a girl named Willis. Franny reveals that Willis is Daddy's friend. Even his little daughter knows about his side chick. This man is seriously a dirty dog. She immediately goes to the bank to start a separate bank account. Meanwhile, George takes his class on a tour of the MET Museum in the city. Justine tags along the tour. At the MET, George runs into his PhD dissertation advisor, Dr. Shelby Warren. Dr. Shelby is surprised to learn that George has acquired a teaching position without his recommendation letter. George lies to his PhD advisor that he is only a temporary instructor filling in for a sick professor, but Shelby remains suspicious. Justine overhears the whole conversation and realizes that George had forged his PhD advisor's recommendation letter to get the teaching position. The next day, Floyd confronts George about his forged recommendation letter. George admits his wrongdoing and asks him to give a chance to explain himself. He pleads with Floyd to wait until the Thanksgiving holiday is over before taking any action. Because of their close family relations, Floyd agrees. At the Thanksgiving dinner, Catherine learns about George's cousin Henry. George's mother reveals that George was very close to Henry, who was an extremely talented artist. Henry's family wanted to do an exhibition of his seascapes after his death, but his paintings suddenly disappeared one day. Catherine quickly figures out that the seascapes George claims were his work were actually painted by his cousin who drowned in a boating accident. She leaves the dinner in disgust. Realizing Catherine is caught up to his lies, George follows her to the washroom, but before he gets to talk to her, Ella's spirit shuts the bathroom's door in his face. Isn't it cool to have a spirit protecting you? Later that night, George sits motionless in his car in the garage with the engine on, lost in his thoughts. A male ghost voice is then heard consoling George. The spirit tells George that it is there to help him, and asks George to free himself. The next day, George joins Floyd on his boat to talk. He reveals that he was ostracized by his school after he was involved in a sexual misconduct incident. Is revealing he behaved inappropriately at work supposed to help his case? Come on, George. Come up with a better one. Floyd firmly tells him that regardless of his reasons, forging recommendation letters is a crime. He also makes it clear to George that he will be fired as a result of it. Telling a psychopathic man that you are going to get him fired while on a boat doesn't seem like a good idea. Later, a thoroughly soaked George returns to campus. Justine confronts him about his affair with Willis. She learned about his affair after she found the scarf she weaved for George's mother on Willis's neck at a cafe. Annoyed and fed up with her prying, tells her to go F herself as he proceeds to leave. She is poking the hornet's nest. It's not going to end well for her. George follows Justine in his car. Here we go. He bumps his car into Justine's car and runs her off the road. Back home, Catherine tries to talk to George about something, but he tells her that he is not in the state to have a conversation. After Catherine leaves, a dejected George seemingly talks to the male spirit in their home. A crow later breaks into Catherine's bedroom through the window, freaking her out. After hearing the commotion, George rushes upstairs to find the crow in the broken window. He tells Catherine to ask her boyfriend to fix the window next morning. The next morning, Catherine sneaks out of the house to meet Justine, but she learns that Justine has been in an accident. Catherine goes to visit her in the hospital, where she learns that the accident has put Justine in a coma, and she might never recover from it. On her way back home, Catherine hears that Floyd has died on the radio. Catherine is certain that George killed Floyd and put Justine in a coma. Meanwhile, after Catherine leaves, George sneaks out to the local pharmacy and buys sleeping pills for Franny's nightmares. Suspicious. At work, when he is informed about Floyd's death, he appears to be shocked. He is also offered to be the intern head of the art department. He pretends to think about it for a while and accepts the offer, saying he will do anything for his department. Yeah, we already witnessed it. Later in his classroom, George finds the cover art of the Swedenborg's book that Floyd had gifted him projected on the screen. Nervous, he tries to change the slide, but can't make it go away. Frustrated and scared, George screams at his students and storms out of the class. He returns back home and gives Catherine one of the protein shakes, and she begins sipping on it. Bad move. George asks her what she wanted to talk about the previous night, but Catherine tells him that it isn't important. George then asks her about Franny, and she reveals that she already put him to bed. George, suspicious, insists on seeing Franny and rushes upstairs. Realizing that George is aware of her plan, she follows him upstairs. He finds an all-dressed Franny asleep. He finally confronts Catherine. The lights start to malfunction. Scared for her life, Catherine runs downstairs and tries to call for help, but George angrily smashes the telephone. He then drags her out of the house. He frantically takes her luggage out of the car and tells her that she can't leave without his daughter. Frustrated, she confronts him about Floyd, Henry, and Justine. George rejects all allegations and tells her that she's just gone crazy. He tells her that she can leave and goes back into the house. After he leaves, Catherine puts her luggage back in the car. However, She soon starts to faint. She realizes that George had spiked her protein shake and cleverly made her drink it. She collects all her strength and rushes into the house to look for Franny. She asks Ella's spirit for help. Catherine doesn't find Franny in her room and passes out on her bed, trying to call the police. Ella's spirit appears to tell Catherine that she is there to help her. However, the male ghost takes Ella away. A frantically sobbing George then appears with an axe, but he is hesitant to kill Catherine. The male ghost encourages him. Ella's spirit takes over Catherine's body and tells George that those who commune with evil will never win. George then lifts his axe and butchers Catherine to death. Holy crap, brutal way to go out. In the morning, Cole comes to babysit Franny. He's left with a note of instructions from George to not disturb Catherine as she is ill. George later returns home from work and proceeds to discover Catherine's body. The police suspect George after they find his axe next to Catherine's body. However, George tells the police that he was teaching the whole day, which is confirmed by witnesses. Due to lack of evidence, the police is forced to release him. George takes Franny to his parents' home in Connecticut, who also picked them up from the police station. Catherine's soul joins forces with Ella's spirit. Together, they awaken Justine and show her what George did. Justine calls George's parents home and leaves a message for him. She tells him that she remembers everything. Calvin's spirit speaks to him and tells him that it was Catherine's own fault and she was trying to hold him back. Calvin tells George to trust his impulse and run away. To avoid being arrested, George escapes on his dead cousin's Henry's boat as Justine speaks to the police. A storm arrives, and thunder opens a portal. Ella and Catherine's spirit tell George that the gates of hell are only visible to those about to come into it. He who is evil, George desperately tries to turn his boat back, but to no avail. He continues to sail into the gates of hell. George's boat disappears in flames, as an upside-down cross appears in the sky. The scene resembles Swedenborg's book's painting. However, the inverted cross indicates that George is damned. Hope you enjoyed our summary. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos weekly. Thanks.